Carl, what have you done?
Think anyone will notice? Mr. Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. After the sudden death of his mother at the age of 11, he moved between LA and Orlando, Florida, trying to find his way in life.
So I'm clearly a Carl Jackson fan.
Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson.
Although he was introduced to hard work, faith, and family values, as a struggling teen, he wandered down the path of least resistance, finding himself jailed twice. By the grace of God, he attended an evangelical church and found that there was a better way and accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior.
There's just no fake stuff about Carl Jackson.
Now, on the Salem Podcast Network, Carl has launched on a journey to help people of all races and backgrounds to discover facts of America's true past, as well as realize the benefits of utilizing their God-given gifts and talents, which far outweigh any benefit from a government subsidy or program.
It's dangerous out here. Let's roll, Carl.
Get going fast.
Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
All right, welcome to today's edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Listen, I got a very informative show for you today. I'm looking forward to speaking with my guest, Michael Rectenwald. He's a Chief Academic Officer of American Scholars. Michael, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast with the Salem Podcast Network.
Hi, Carl. Great to be here.
Thank you. Listen, before we get into the Great Reset, I think this is extremely important because I got to be honest with you. When I first started hearing about this thing a couple of years ago, it kind of sounded wacky to talk about it. But we've been seeing some of the things that seems to be falling into play for the World Economic Forum. But before we get to that, I want to get your take on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And just what you think about what's happening there, or at least get you to opine on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible development, but I should say, and this is not in any way to excuse Putin, but it's been predicated upon what the U.S. has done there and what the West has done there. In particular, you know, they under Obama, they orchestrated a coup and replaced the elected president who was neutral with reference to NATO and Russia. And they installed a very anti-Russian president who then began an onslaught against the people of Donbass, the eastern region there, just west of Russia. And, they killed some 14,000 people, plus burned people alive in a union hall. And these were Russian-speaking people who mostly identified with Russia. So it's, there's no excuse for what Putin's doing. It's inhumane and it's a violation of people's rights and the national sovereignty of Ukraine. And this is not any excuse for Putin, but there is no question that the U.S. really, with NATO, they really set this situation up, and it's an unfortunate development. They really wanted Ukraine to be part of the West, and to woo them away from Russia. And then, some of the people that were involved in this coup were neo-Nazis. So it's very ironic that here in the U.S., where we hear all this stuff where everybody who's left of Stalin is called a Nazi, they're actually collaborating with actual neo-Nazis.
That is fascinating. I was talking about this war as a green energy war, and I knew that Zelensky wasn't necessarily doing things that were. I wasn't informed about that, to be honest with you. I knew that the West, I knew that the United States under the leadership of Barack Obama, completely feckless president. I knew that Joe Biden was kind of continuing the policies. I realized somewhat what NATO was doing. I wasn't completely up to speed with what some of the complaints that I was hearing about Zelensky, and I don't want to excuse what's happening whatsoever. I think Putin is an evil dictator. Quite frankly, I want him dead, but I do agree with you that the U.S. Totally debacled, and NATO seems to be, in my opinion, almost worthless. It's insane what we see going on. So listen, I appreciate that take. That is a fresh take, and I appreciate you opining on that. Let's get to the Great Reset here, Michael, because again, a couple of years ago, I began reading about this. I first heard about it it was just a Fox Business News column, and I happened to run across it, and I was just fascinated by it. But talking about it initially, you kind of felt as if you were a nut job, or at least I did. Do you think that was strategic from the World Economic Forum, or I mean, Klaus Schwab has been around for several decades, obviously, writing about this type of stuff. But is there some strategy to that, or is it just that maybe as Westerners we didn't want to believe that people like Klaus Schwab could be so diabolical?
I think it's a massive gaslighting campaign. For example, they openly avow this project on the World Economic Forum website. Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malaret wrote a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. I mean, this is an open, avowed project and plan. So then at the same time, they feed to the media this idea that, to worry about the Great Reset or to talk about the Great Reset is to involve yourself in conspiracy theory. So on the one hand, they're undertaking it, and on the other hand, they want to silence all opposition to it and destroy any kind of credibility in those who would oppose it. And so I was put in a predicament myself because, I had scholarly credentials at stake. And I didn't want to discredit myself by talking about something that was lunacy. But the more I read into it, the more I realized this thing is real.
And that honestly, and that's you're so right. They try to make people sound like lunatics, while at the same time they are progressing forward with this agenda. And it takes people like you. It's sad, Michael, but we live in an environment now where you really do have to be courageous to stand up against the left, and the left in America, these globalist elites like the Klaus Schwab. So I appreciate you for reading more into this, researching this, and just helping us to understand it better. Let me start with this. Klaus Schwab, again, he's the founder of the World Economic Forum. He's a trained economist, mechanical engineer, and he published his book, COVID-19. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he did. He published a book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset. So you're right. This isn't anything that's been hidden. But he talks about this stakeholder capitalism, and he tries to talk about the weaknesses of capitalism, which I think are insane. But that's what he does. But what is stakeholder capitalism to the average layman? And I'm not talking about the scholar. Can you help the working class American, which I believe is who, quite frankly, worldwide, but specifically the working class American? What is stakeholder capitalism? What is its aim under the World Economic Forum?
That's a great question. Okay, so typically a corporation is meant to produce wealth and, goods for the community, goods for people to buy, and to profit on its production and distribution. And that's been the main criteria for corporations to deem them successful, is how profitable are they? How many goods do they bring to the market? Now, the way it works under stakeholder capitalism, so that was called shareholder capitalism. That's what they're calling it now. Because stakeholder capitalism supposedly takes into consideration everybody that a corporation affects, including customers, workers, the community, and the environment. This is the key. So they're enlisting all these stakeholders into the corporate agenda. And so what's happened is they have signed on, the World Economic Forum has signed on 1,000 or more global corporations as part of this Great Reset project, who are on board with this stakeholder capitalism. This is if you go to the WEF's website, wefforum.com, and type in partners, you'll see it's a who's who of corporations from across the world. All the major players are involved. And so it sounds very good, like what they do is they use this kind of euphemistic or positive sounding language in order to pass off what is really a kind of totalitarian dictatorship to corporations and to the population. The stakeholder capitalism is really based on the environmental, social, and governance score or index in the stock market, which is a way to direct capital investment to these corporations that are abiding by the environmental, social, and governance imperatives of the World Economic Forum and the UN.
Yeah, this stuff gets pretty deep. You talked about all of these corporations that have basically attached themselves or basically sponsoring this type of stuff. What does that mean for the average everyday American? And what is their goal? What do they want to achieve? Why would they want to sign on to this? Is it just because they're morally bankrupt? Are they virtue signaling? Is it because they live in this bubble with the elites? What is I don't understand why major corporations would want to sign on to this, except for, I don't know, greedy leaders at the top of these corporations.
Well, that's a very good question, and I've tried to answer that question because, it looks like it's not in their interest, right? Because it adds a ton of bureaucratic cost to their operations. They have to file all this paperwork to show that they're ESG friendly or abiding, that they're doing the ESG thing. So what I think it is that it's a form of monopoly. It's a way of monopolizing the economy, because it drives investments away from the non-ESG players and towards all the ESG players. So it drives out competition. So it's a monopoly scheme. And this means that for the average person, this means that not only will you be paying extra money for these ESG products, many kind of things are going to become unavailable. And we see this with the attempt to phase out oil, to phase out the use of petroleum and other oil products. And that this is driving the cost of oil up as we keep limiting our own production in the United States, for example. It drives production and distribution of oil to these other players like Russia, unfortunately. And the U.S. is dependent on Russia now, thanks to stopping the Anwar drilling and the Keystone Pipeline and other projects that Biden has nixed. And what happens is it's a way of just winnowing out the competition, getting rid of them. So what this means too for the average person is banks are all signed on to this. So if you have a small business and you are not an ESG company, you may never be able to get a loan, because banks are saying that they are going to keep track of the ESG scores of all these companies that they invest in. So if your company's heavily invested in oil or uses gas too much, or, in the future when electric cars are becoming, completely, common and accepted, in fact, demanded, then if you still own a fleet of, say, trucks, say you have a carpet cleaning business and you have a fleet of vans that goes out to clean carpets, if those are gas powered, there's a chance you may not be able to get a loan from your bank. So this is the kind of way that it affects people. It's going to drive up prices on everything. It's going to get rid of competition. It's going to make investments in ESG companies the way, and nothing else will be accepted.
That's you know what, that's it's a great answer. By the way, I'm thinking of some of the byproducts, if you will, of this ESG score. Obviously, there would be forced compliance by people that freedom loving Americans, people that are conservatives like myself. I don't know your bent, but I am a conservative, and so there'll be forced compliance, and also I'm suspecting there will be a whole lot of poverty to go around, because how will the average American be able to afford this? Obviously, it will kill a lot of small businesses unless they are, just as you mentioned, unless they are compliant when it comes to this ESG stuff, and then it'll kind of keep us divided, like the World Economic Forum, in my opinion, used the COVID crisis, if you will, in order to advance their agenda. I feel like it. This is just my opinion. I feel like the Biden administration, the left-wing radicals in the Democrat Party are a part of this. They're all in cahoots. So maybe talk about that a little bit. I mean, this is. Obviously, what you said is absolutely true, but I'm trying to get to the working class, the working man. This is going to significantly kill lifestyles, not just here in the United States, but globally. But that's what we're looking at, aren't we? I mean,
yes.
we're looking at increased poverty
Yes.
in the United States.
Yes. By the way, I'm a free market libertarian and a cultural conservative. So,
Okay. All right.
but I should say yes. What's going to do?
That means you're a better guest already, Michael.
Okay. What I was going to say is that, in fact, this is the object, which is to drive down our standard of living. They want to reduce the income and the consumption levels and everything of the masses. They see them as useless eaters who must not burn so much oil, not eat so much meat, not drive around and go on vacations and things like this. They want these people. They want us, as they said on their website, you will own nothing and you will be happy. So this is a kind of socialism on the ground for the vast majority, while they have complete power on top. So I call it corporate socialism, because it's these corporate oligarchs on top with all this power and like existing socialism for the vast majority. That's kind of the object.
What do you think? And obviously we can't completely know these people's hearts or minds, but what drives people like Klaus Schwab? Is it just that he's morally bankrupt, doesn't fear God or have a reverence for God or religion? What do you think motivates these people? It seems like, to me, I'm like, it's hard to fathom. Obviously, I can now, everything that I've witnessed and we've all witnessed with COVID-19, but it's hard to fathom that people could be so evil and diabolical. I'm like, are these people just bored? Have they just achieved so much success financially, materially, whatever it may be, that it's like, okay, what's the next step in life? Let me destroy others. Let me control others. They really believe this is these are moral issues.
Yeah, this is very much a moral issue. What I think, it's hard to say, as you said, it's very hard to say what people's actual intentions are. But what they tell us is this: they believe that climate change is this really encroaching, incipient evil that's going to destroy the planet. Whether they actually believe this or not, this is what they say. So you could say that they think they're doing good, and they want to get us to stop behaving in a way that they think endangers our climate. I think, frankly, that this climate catastrophism is complete nonsense. I don't see any signs of it, and I've read plenty about it, and there's no indication that climate change is threatening our habitat at all. In fact, there's no indication that the kind of green energy that they want to replace it with will be sufficient for the world, and that it can actually happen without bankrupting us entirely, because the cost is so great. So they think they're doing good, I think. They believe they're doing good. Now, are they believers in anything? No. These people, there isn't a single believer, Christian, or even Jewish believer among any persons involved with the World Economic Forum. They're all straight up materialists. They think this is all there is, and the only heaven that could be would be their form of utopia on Earth. In their case, I think that their utopia would be something like most of the masses basically being totally obedient, and them basically controlling how things go in terms of the economy, our social existence, everything.
Are you, Michael? Are you a rare breed? I think this is a rhetorical question, and I'm gonna ask it anyway. You have to be a rare breed amongst scholars, because it seems to me that academia has gone so far left that to hear a person like you with the credentials that you have is it's refreshing. But it seems to be increasingly rare. And I look at all of these issues, whether it's, the World Economic Forum using the crisis of COVID, using the crisis of climate change, which I want to dive into a little further and try to connect some dots here. You're a rare breed, aren't you?
Yes. In fact, Carl, I was a Marxist. And
no way. Okay, yeah. That I did not know.
I was
all right,
a
that's
Marxist.
Pretty cool. That's interesting.
I was a professor at NYU, a far leftist, a Marxist, and basically I got struck down from my horse. I had a Damascus moment, and completely saw things in a completely different way within 5 seconds. And that's
okay. You got to tell us. I mean, you got to tell us about that. That is very interesting. I'm curious to know what happened.
Well, I was at NYU, and I as I said, I told you what my politics and disposition was. I started to criticize what I saw going on in the university with this social justice movement and all of the kind of craziness that they were engaging in. And then when I did this publicly, I was roundly attacked to the point where I was basically driven into the margins of the university. They stuck me in the Russian department, moved my office. They totally isolated me. This was over criticizing social justice and the way they were instituting all these crazy things in the university, like a bias reporting hotline and safe spaces and trigger warnings and all this stuff. I started to criticize it, and they tried to ruin me academically. And because of that, I saw the errors of my ways, that I was involved with totalitarianism, and that I was keeping company with totalitarians. And then I realized that the whole left was filled with these people. This is all they are. They're authoritarians who want to dictate everything. They will strip you of your property. They will take you and ruin you if they have to get their way. And then, I also had a religious conversion as well, Christianity. So,
wow, that is fascinating. What could you about what year did this occur?
It started in 2016.
Wow, this is very recent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it started in 2016. To tell you the thing is, in September of 2016, I was a Marxist. By November 6th, I voted for Donald Trump. So
unbelievable. That's a podcast in and of itself, Michael. That is completely phenomenal. Well, thank God. Praise God. I'm glad. Honestly, I'm glad that people like you are coming into the Christian family. I'm also glad that people like you are shedding the light and helping us to understand what's going on here as far as this great reset is concerned. I feel like we need people like you that have kind of been in the fire. You understand the what's happening on college campuses and academia, because you talked about how the totalitarian tactics of the left. And what I fear and then we'll go back obviously to the topic at hand. But what I fear is, Michael, are all of the totalitarians that they are raising up on college campuses, students that are anti-American and don't understand that they live in the greatest country that God has ever given man. Would you opine on that?
Oh,
really
absolutely.
Quickly, and
they're totally indoctrinating these students into this far leftist madness. It's really like a training camp. That's all these colleges are. They're training camps for indoctrination. They're not academic institutions any longer. They are basically ideological apparatuses that are meant to brainwash people and bring them into socialist ideals and to make them completely anti-American and to have them shut down anything else. I mean, if you can see this all over the place. Anytime a speaker comes to try to speak on something that the left doesn't approve of, they don't even listen. They just start chanting these ridiculous chants. It's the most anti-intellectual, anti-academic, fascists, really. They are the fascists. That's the interesting thing. They call themselves anti-fascist, but they are actually fascist because they have they're like the brown shirts or the communist Bolsheviks. They'll just shut you down, and if they're given a chance, they kill you as well. If it were legal, they would just kill you because they think they've been trained and indoctrinated to believe that you are the enemy. You are the person that's keeping utopia from coming about. So recently there was a campus event. I forget what school, but one of these the speaker was somebody who lost his child because his wife wanted the child to be trans. And he tried to speak at this school, and they would not let him get a word out edgewise.
Oh, I know who you're talking about, and I forget his name slips me, but I know exactly who you're talking about. Man, this is scary stuff. Any recommendations as to what I can't stand? I'm not a big government guy at all, but I am totally afraid of what's happening on our college and university campuses. I'm one that, listen, I don't have a college degree. I went to community college for a couple of years and dropped out and just started reading incessantly and learning about lots of things going on in the world, United States history and all this kind of stuff. But are there any solutions, in your opinion, what we can do to curtail the indoctrination that's happening on college and university campuses across the United States?
Well, it's been a long march through the institutions by these Marxists, and it took them 70 years to take over. It's going to take decades for us to reverse it. Even if we start today, it's 40 years to turn this around. This is how bad it is.
Oh my Lord! That is a sobering thought, and it's a reminder that. Freedom, we always have to fight for freedom in the United States. But man, that is sobering. Okay, getting back to the conversation on the Great Reset.
Yeah.
All of this public-private partnership rhetoric, stakeholder rhetoric, all of this stuff has been, all of this came from the World Economic Forum. Am I wrong in saying that? Because there was a point. Okay.
It all came from the WEF. It started with Klaus Schwab's book. In 1971, he started introducing this idea of the stakeholder, and then Stakeholder Capitalism came out of it, and the public-private partnerships, which means basically the state in connection with corporations are basically going to rule over us. And so we'll have no democratic say in what's being done. So we're going to be ruled over by a corporate state hybrid that will not be answerable to us democratically. We'll have no vote in any of this. We don't have any vote in whether these companies institute these ESG scores and whether these banks institute it. This is a way of governing us. They're surreptitiously subverting our democracy and inserting their own power in its place. This is why I say it's totalitarian as well.
And I got to tell you, Michael, I don't feel like I feel like Americans have been asleep at the wheel, because I see the corporate involvement, but I see the same type of takeover with these bureaucracies that circumvent the will of the people, circumvent the voters, and all of even presidents that get in office. And Biden is doing it now. He'll use these bureaucracies, whether it's the EPA or whomever, to advance their agenda, and we have no say in that. It's one of these. I got to be honest with you. I was not a Trump supporter. I didn't know what to believe as far as Trump was concerned. I was a Ted Cruz guy. I had a big argument with a colleague of mine on radio here, right here in Orlando, and he proved to be right. I was completely wrong, because what I pay attention to is deregulation. It's how I know a politician is really serious and not just about talking words. And Donald Trump began to do that. I wish he would have done more with spending. I wish he would have not fallen for the Wuhan flu trap, if you will. But he was a serious juggernaut when it came to deregulation, which I can appreciate. Let me go here for a second, because these stats are alarming, and I want you to opine on this, because I'm not sure, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but I can't help but to think, I'm looking at this war in Ukraine, and however you might, those of you that are in the listening and viewing audience, and by the way, make sure you share this podcast. This guest is phenomenal, Michael Rectenwald. He is the Chief Academic Officer of American Scholars. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you click the bell so you get the notifications, and Rumble. But what we're seeing, we're giving Putin basically $70 million per day. Michael, essentially helping to subsidize this attack on Ukraine. This has become, I've called it a green energy war, or a Green New Deal war. But let me just read from Just the News and then get your take on this. And I'm quoting, "The Biden administration must work with allies to hit Putin where it hurts. That's the energy sector. The U.S. continues to import an average of 209,000 barrels per day of crude oil and $500,000 of barrels per day of other petroleum products from Russia, which continue to provide Putin, obviously, with the billions of dollars to offset the effect of any sanctions." You have the little wannabe fascist or dictator in Canada, Justin Trudeau, who's announced that he will ban imports of crude oil from Russia. So it brings me back to Biden. What the heck are we doing? And this is where I'm like, it makes me nervous, because I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but at the same token, I'm like, this is totally falling in line with the Great Reset, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is falling perfectly in line, because what they're doing now, since what we did is offshore our production to a large extent to Russia, to China, to other places, with the oil, particularly Russia and the Middle East, and they basically now with Russia in a war with Ukraine, and deemed a villain, of course, what it's going to do is force the U.S., because they will not do the drilling here, they will not do the Keystone Pipeline. It's forcing the hand of this green energy policy. What they're already saying, and it's in the New York Times, I just read something today, where this means that what they have to do is up the ante with reference to green energy. So it's going to cause this development to accelerate towards this green, sustainable so-called future, because they're going to say, we can't keep, in good conscience, we can't keep buying oil from Russia because it's funding their war. I think, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial either, but I think the U.S. baited Russia into this. And they basically are happy that this is happening, because it's feeding into so many agendas, including the resuscitation of Biden, whose poll numbers are in the toilet or were, including the resuscitation of this green energy policy and the Build Back Better plan. All of this has been accelerated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because now we have to develop green energy because we refuse to drill or here. And likewise, we're going to be short on gas, on petroleum and other oil products. So what are they going to do? They're going to accelerate this green project.
Yeah, this is absolutely scary, but it makes total sense. I mean, the fact that we're basically just sitting back and it's an easy answer to stop Putin's advancement on Ukraine, and the answer is drill, baby, drill, and it's not happening. It's fake. I watched Biden go out and give a speech or whatever, and he gives a State of the Union speech, and I'm like, everything that you could do to stop this, you're not doing. And I don't want to send troops out there, but I mean, again, the answer is pretty simple. We have the Keystone XL pipeline, we have ANWR, as you explained earlier in the podcast, and it's like, okay, we could end this yesterday. Right. If we wanted to. We could really put the screws on Putin. We're obviously not doing that. So this is I was going back and forth in my mind this morning, to be honest, Michael, and I was like, I don't know who's more evil. I don't know if Putin or Biden is more evil. And I know that may sound extreme to some people, but when you consider everything that Biden, the administration is doing, and all of the Democrats that are aware of this are doing to kind of stay out of this fight, and again, they don't need to send troops there, but try to give face to this idea that they're really supporting Ukraine in the fight. It's total, complete, and utter BS.
Yes, they're
so
using
it's a little
Ukraine
frustrating.
They're using Ukraine as a pawn. They're letting this invasion go on because this gives us all kinds of rationale for undertaking these policies that Biden and the administration have in mind. So they're using Ukraine as a simple pawn and letting this happen. They could starve Putin and Russia of capital by, shutting down the oil exports immediately, and this would put an end to the whole campaign. They'd have no money. They wouldn't have any income. This is a huge part of their economy. So, some of the things they're doing are ancillary compared to that. They're trivial, really. I agree that when you consider Biden's role in Ukraine in the first place, he oversaw the relations between the U.S. and Ukraine, and he oversaw the coup in 2014 that installed this puppet regime. And since then, basically, Ukraine has been a launching pad for the State Department of the U.S. They're simply a space for the U.S. to undertake its aggression against Russia. The reason that they want to vilify Russia is they want Ukraine to be part of the West. They want to get Putin out because he is not buying into the New World Order globalist reset agenda.
Yeah, you're absolutely. I explained this on my show here locally on Salem or Orlando, but I look. I'm thinking Putin is looking out for his national interest. We don't like how this is playing out, but Putin is looking, and I'm not excusing Putin by any stretch of the imagination, so please spare me the emails and messages, but Putin essentially is looking out, and he's an evil guy, there's no doubt about it, but he's looking out for his national interest. Xi Jinping is looking out for their national interest in China, and they're just kind of, I think they're going to try to take advantage, and they are getting lower fuel prices or crude oil from prices, whatever, from Russia. And then you have what I call, Michael, the metrosexuals of the World Economic Forum and NATO that are just essentially doing nothing. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think NATO was a little surprised about Putin's aggression as far as how far he continues to go with this war. Maybe they expected he would just take, maybe Kiev or, I don't know, a couple of regions of Ukraine and call it a day, but he doesn't appear to be doing that. And I think they feel, NATO feels a little discombobulated because perhaps he's going further than they expected. You think I'm wrong on that?
I'm not sure. I think that, first of all, we don't really know what's going on over there. It's very hard to get accurate depictions and facts about the situation. I don't know if some of the partners in NATO may be surprised. I don't think the U.S. is. And I think the U.S. has pretty much choreographed all this in a way. I'm not saying that, they made Putin invade, but they certainly set up the predicates for it to happen.
No, you're right. Honestly, there's a buddy of mine on radio here with the American Adversaries says pretty much the same thing, and I'm in agreement with him. But this is what he shared. I don't disagree with that because you sit back and watch this, and I'm like, none of this makes sense except that the U.S. is involved, like it or not. It's a tale of. It's a sad state of affairs with the Biden administration and the Democrats demand justice, whomever may be running the White House, the far left-wing radicals.
I call it the Politburo, yeah.
That's good. Okay, that's good. I like that. I'm going to have to steal that, Michael. You're the scholar, but I can sound smarter by saying that. So I appreciate it. All right, let me ask you this. 2 events, and then I want you to share what you think the audience needs to hear about the Great Reset, so they kind of got the Great Reset one-on-one. Climate change, you touched on that. I want to hear you opine on that again, just social justice, how all of this plays into the Great Reset. China, how they play into the Great Reset. But there were 2 events that occurred in 2018 and 2019 that were organized by the WEF, and they became the inspiration for today's Great Reset in 2018. And you know these, but I'm just going through them for the sake of the listening audience. In 2018, the WEF collaborated with the Johns Hopkins Center for the Health Security to conduct, is it CLADX or CLADX?
CLADX, yeah, CLAD.
CLADX, all right, to simulate a national pandemic response. That was one. And then in 2019, the WEF worked with Johns Hopkins and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on another pandemic exercise, which simulated a response to an international response to a novel coronavirus outbreak. And this occurred 2 months before, and this was in your speech. I'm literally reading for those of you that might be tuning in, watching. I'm speaking to Michael Rectenwald. He's the Chief Academic Officer for American Scholars, and he gave a fantastic speech at Hillsdale, and it is in their publication in Primus. So I would encourage you to check that out and check out Michael Rectenwald's work. And you heard here, he was a Marxist just 5-6 years ago. So again, we appreciate him being on. He is a wealth of knowledge. And then you talk about the CLADX event, held 201 simulations anticipating nearly all of the COVID crisis, Michael, from government health agencies, big tech, media responses, the effects that included worldwide lockdowns, the collapse of business industries, adopting biometrics, surveillance technology, social media censorship to combat misinformation, flooding mainstream media with the authoritative sources. Can you say Anthony Fauci? I mean, this is insane. You read this and I'm like, you think you're nuts, and then you're like, oh my God, this is. They set this up. Please talk me off the cliff.
Well, I
Michael.
mean, it's either these people are the most prophetic people on earth, such that they could anticipate every aspect of the COVID crisis and have a simulation They ran a simulation about a novel coronavirus just 2 months before the coronavirus hit. Either they're prophets of the first order, or they're involved in a staged event. I'm not going to adjudicate the answer on that. Either they have so much prescience that they know what's going to happen and they're just gifted with prophecy, or else they're involved in something. I mean, there's no other answer. There's no other way to look at it.
Yeah, this is completely. Tell us how social justice plays a part in the Great Reset.
Well, that's part of it.
And BlackRock is another.
Yes, the Environmental, Social, and Governance Score or Index (ESG). The S stands for social, and that really means social justice. So what they mean is they want to install, they want to make sure corporations, companies have the right constitution in their employee base and their boards of directors. So really, this is about making sure. Basically, this is an attack on the majority. They don't want. I'm going to put it straight up. They don't want white men or white people doing a lot of the stuff. They want to get rid of them because they are trying to make sure they have people under their control. This is the key. So if you make people very ingratiated to you by virtue of the fact that they've gotten their promotion on the basis of identity instead of competence, then you own them. And that's really what they're trying to do. That's what the whole social justice movement is about.
And you cut America down to size because let's be honest. Sadly, I'm part of the black community. The left would argue differently. I don't care. I'm part of Jesus Christ community. So, but let's face it. What the World Economic Forum is trying to do is, just like you said, to get rid of white men in particular. I think white Christian men, white men of faith in particular, they're trying to get rid of those that were produced. And it's almost like they're trying to cut Americans down to size by getting rid of people that would be really that would have a proclivity to excel. Let's be honest, whether it's science, technology, engineering, math. It's totally. I mean, I think eventually this is going to bite them in the butt. The problem is, if this comes to fruition, and they're doing a pretty good job of it right now, this is going to cause some severe pain like we've never seen before within the United States.
This is the whole function of what I say, what woke ideology or wokeness, the whole function of wokeness is to make people feel guilty so that they will surrender their rights and their property and abdicate them without question. So they're trying to guilt trip people into basically giving up their rights and property. That's what wokeness is about. That's why they're teaching it in the universities. It's all part of the Great Reset. Wokeness functions as the ideological element in the Great Reset. It is the means by which you take and vilify and guilt trip and shame people out of their value, out of their earnings, out of their rights, and so forth.
Wow. Yeah, this is phenomenal. Again, it's hard to imagine that people could be so evil, but they exist. I think we've had it so good in America for so long that we assume this type of evil would not exist or come to our shores, and sadly, it has. And a lot of people that are smart people are the conduits of perpetuating this evil. Talk to us about BlackRock. What they're up to when it comes to this. What is there's a connection with China, and just anything else you think this listening audience needs to know about the Great Reset, so they walk away way more informed than they ever were on the topic.
BlackRock Inc., headed by Larry Fink, and I think the name is pretty indicative of what he is.
That's good. Yeah.
They are the largest asset manager in the world. They lead the pack entirely, and they are 100% behind the ESG Great Reset project. So they are directing their investments towards these ESG abiding companies and away from others. Larry Fink has basically threatened corporations, saying, if you don't buy in, you're not going to get any money. We're not going to get he's in control of all these assets. He doesn't own them. Some people think they own them. They don't own them. They're managers. They're asset managers.
Right.
They direct investments, people's portfolios towards the companies that they think are good. So they're saying they will not invest in these non-ESG companies. So he is a major player in the Great Reset. And then all the other asset managers are involved too. Management groups are the top 10 all the way down. Vanguard Group, State Street, UBS, and on and on and on.
This is, they've essentially got us trapped, so we have to fight back the best we can, and the best way I know how starts in November of 2022 of this year, obviously with the elections. China, what is China's connection? How does China play into what's happening here?
Well, I think China, first of all, China's the model for the whole world that they're trying to roll out, because they want the same kind of situation where China, you have a communist state, effectively politically communist, but they have for-profit corporations who are in control, who are basically in cahoots with the state. And you can't do business in China if the state doesn't approve of you. So they want the same kind of scenario here. State-approved corporate for-profit companies and everybody else under socialism. So China's the model. Secondly, China is a beneficiary of the investments of people like BlackRock Inc. and Larry Fink and other companies, Vanguard and so forth. China has a way of skirting the ESG scores, and they're still giving them investments because they are not honest in their representation. Their companies misrepresent their environmental, social, and governance scores. Obviously, China is a major polluter, terrible with human rights, so social justice there in all regards. But they're getting 30% of BlackRock Inc.'s investments.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. Because of what you just said, another question pops into mind. I'm sitting there thinking these major corporations, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, you name it, all of these elites, if you will, that have some of the biggest corporations in the entire world, they kind of buck the American system. And honestly, I'm coming up with this idea, Mike. I look at a lot of these companies and I'm like, if you go to China and voluntarily give up some of your goods, your trade secrets, if you will, I don't understand why they still have patent protection here, but that's a conversation for another day. I'm like, if you're anti-American, then screw you. That's just the way that I look at it. But I wonder, based upon what you said, okay, so the ESG stuff these companies follow here, they don't do it in China. And at first I looked at it as like, this is just more opportunity for them to make money in China. But is it also an escape for these corporations that are totally fake, that I know are just virtue signaling? They're not the bastions of morality. Is it possible that they're like, hey, we don't really want to deal with this too? China gives us an avenue where we don't have to deal with this ESG, or do I think too highly?
Yes, that's right. What they do is they offshore their non-ESG behavior, and they offshore their guilt. First of all, that's one thing they do. They offshore their guilt and all the social justice righteousness here in the U.S., where they're focusing on everything that what happens here as being evil. They completely ignore China, where the most evil totalitarian regime operates, and where they have people in concentration camps, where they harvest people's organs. There's no human rights whatsoever. If the state says, that's it, you could be shipped off to a concentration camp if you're a Uyghur. You could easily be put in a concentration camp, and they brainwash people there. So all of the horrors that are going on in China are completely ignored by these virtue signalers here at home. And they, imagine if the United States had concentration camps with Muslims in them, like huge amounts of people, millions of people in a concentration camp. Imagine how these leftists would go crazy. Apparently, we don't know, but they don't say a word about China. And so it's a way of offshoring their guilt, offshoring their cheap labor, skirting the ESG index, requirements and so on and so forth. So it's terrible. And I agree, revoking intellectual property patents and other things would be a really good move, because why should they have protection of the state for their monopolies if in fact they're undercutting that very state and our interests abroad?
Exactly. I don't know why Republicans haven't thought of this. I'm going to write a column on it. I think it's one of the things they need to start advancing. But I'm like, if these companies become an enemy of the state, in essence, dealing with China, communist China, I just don't understand. I know as conservatives, we're small government, and so I understand the fear and perhaps the trepidation of doing things like this, but I feel like in order to save our country, we have to get drastic, and that means calling out those companies that are clearly anti-American, in my opinion. The transhumanist movement, Michael, tell us how this connects with the Great Reset, and then just leave us with, as we close out, leave us with whatever else you think we need to know about the Great Reset, please.
Yeah, I mean, the transhumanist movement is part of what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution. So the first was mechanical, then there was industrial, the second one was hydraulic and, combustion engine and all that. The third was digital, and the fourth is a combination of digital and biological. And so what they're doing is, and Klaus Schwab wrote a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, in which he extols the virtues of this merging of human beings and machines, cyborgs.
Basically,
They
AI.
want to merge human beings with machines. They want to have control over us vis-a-vis technology and connect our brains directly to the internet or the web or the cloud, where they both control what goes in and what comes out.
Yeah, so all right, that's wow, yeah, that's insane. That's scary. Is it okay? What do you want to leave the audience with, Michael? Is there anything that I have not covered that you feel like the audience needs to know about the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, maybe something that's happening around the world that kind of connects the dots? What can you leave us with?
Well, I would say that the recent situation in Canada is really part of it. And you saw they were revoking people's property rights, taking their property, seizing their bank accounts, freezing or seizing, whatever you want to call it, and basically stripping people of their right to protest, their right to speech, and vilifying them as neo-Nazis and far right-wing, alt-right, whatever they call them. So this is all part and parcel of it, but I would like to leave the audience with something that they can do instead of just worrying.
Okay,
we know what they're up to. So what we can do is, first of all, if you have any stocks in the stock market, try to get them out of these ESG conforming companies and move them onto other places. Don't buy into this system because it only feeds the beast. Secondly, try to become entrepreneurial in some way. Try to get your livelihood out from underneath of these institutions, because the chance of being canceled is great. They are going to institute a personal ESG score where every person will have an ESG score. And so they can cancel you based on the fact that you weren't environmentally, socially, or governance-wise conforming. So try to become independent, to some degree entrepreneurial. And third, practice the free market yourself, because they're trying to destroy the free market. So keep the free market alive by practicing it yourself, forming networks or parallel structures of economic activity that is not cancelable by these people. So, that I'll leave it at that, because people could have to think about how that applies to them personally. It really is a matter of supporting free market companies, including your own and others that you know of, try to get away from these people that are trying to institute this complete world-changing system.
Listen, Michael, I really appreciate your time. Where can people connect with you? Where can people read material that you've produced? Where's the best place to find you for those that are out there listening? They're trying to learn more about the Great Reset. And guys, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of people talking about the Great Reset. Thank God there are some big names in radio, such as Glenn Beck, that are talking about the Great Reset. He's doing a phenomenal job. But there's a lot of wannabes out there too. Michael Rectenwald is not one of them. He is the real deal Holyfield, again, a chief academic officer with the American Scholars. Where else can people go to find your work, Michael?
Everything is on my own website. I don't use Substack or anything like that. So all you have to do is go to michaelrectenwald.com. That's Michael, RECTENWALD.com, one word. All my writings are there. All my books are there. All my media appearances are there. Everything is there. So michaelrectenwald.com.
That's smart. You're following your own advice. That's smart. That's very smart. michaelrectenwald.com. And again, guys, remember to follow me on Facebook, Carl Jackson Radio, Twitter and Parler at Carl Jackson Show. Check out my website, carljacksonshow.com. And also everywhere podcasts are found, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, you name it. Please like and share this podcast. I got to be honest with you, Michael. I think this is one of the most important ones, that I've done. You've been a fantastic guest. I look forward to having you back on in the future, and also on my radio program. You've been very informative, very helpful, and honestly, I think I appreciate your courage for talking out and speaking out against this stuff. Obviously, you had to go through some things in academia. You've come out on the other side, and I think you're I think you're a great American. I really appreciate what you're doing, and I think you're contributing to the fight to save this country. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you, Carl. I really appreciate that, and it's great to be with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.